January 17th, 2026, a date that will go down in history books as the moment the United States stopped leading an alliance and started demanding rent from it. And this is indeed the beginning of much more serious events than just another round of U.S. tariffs on its allies. Greenland looks like a geopolitical gift, the world's largest island, 38 million tons of rare earth oxides sitting under melting ice. A missile defense position so perfectly placed it makes Pentagon planners weep with joy. But could this gift destroy us from within? But here's what many newspaper headlines and analysts overlook. This isn't a clean win. It isn't even a clean loss. It's the classic guns versus butter dilemma repackaged for the 21st century. By solving one problem, resource security, we risk triggering a mechanism that could hollow out American industry, shatter our alliance network, and hand China the global leadership role it's been quietly positioning for. Let me show you the math. Why everyone suddenly started talking about Greenland? Global warming. The Kvanefjeld project in southern Greenland sits on one of the largest undeveloped rare earth deposits on the planet. Tanbreez, nearby, holds heavy rare earths, dysprosium, terbium, the elements you've never heard of, but that make everything from F-35 fighter jets to Virginia-class submarines actually function. Here are the numbers that matter. China currently controls 80 to 90% of global rare earth processing. Not mining, processing. That's the choke point. In a serious conflict, Beijing could strangle American defense production within months simply by cutting off supply. Greenland contains approximately 1.25% of global rare earth reserves. That sounds small until you realize it ranks 7th worldwide and holds the largest undeveloped heavy rare earth deposits in existence. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates 7.8 billion barrels of oil and 91.9 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in the West Greenland-East Canada province. Now do the strategic math. If the United States controlled these deposits, it could theoretically supply the military-industrial complex's rare earth needs for a century. No more dependence on a rival power for the materials that build stealth bombers and nuclear submarines. That's the pitch. That's why this administration is pushing so hard. But resources are only half the equation. Here's something most people don't think about. The Earth isn't a perfect sphere. It's an oblate spheroid, slightly flattened at the poles. This geometric fact has massive military implications. If Russia launches an ICBM, or, more critically, a hypersonic glide vehicle toward the continental United States, the shortest path isn't over the Pacific or the Atlantic. It's straight over the Arctic Circle, directly over Greenland. Thule Air Base, now called Patuxent Space Base, sits at the top of Greenland. It houses the 12th Space Warning Squadron and operates an upgraded early warning radar capable of detecting incoming threats 3,000 miles out. In an era of hypersonic weapons where time to target has shrunk from 30 minutes to potentially 10, that radar is the difference between response and annihilation. Greenland isn't just a resource play, it's the front porch of North American defense. The administration knows the history. They're counting on it. In 1867, Secretary of State William Seward purchased Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. The press called it Seward's folly, a frozen wasteland, worthless. Today, Alaska produces oil, strategic positioning, and nobody questions whether it was worth it. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from Napoleon, doubled the size of the nation overnight. History vindicated him. This administration wants to stand in that lineage. Jefferson, Seward, now them. Here's the problem with that framing. Both Alaska and Louisiana were purchased from willing sellers. Russia wanted out of Alaska. Napoleon needed cash for his European wars. The transactions were clean. Greenland isn't for sale. Denmark has said no. The Greenlandic government has said no. The populations of both countries oppose it. When you can't buy something but you try to take it anyway, that's not vision. That's something else entirely. European diplomats are already calling it Crimea 2.0. And that comparison should terrify anyone who cares about American moral authority. Now we get to the part that keeps me up at night, the part that almost nobody is talking about. Let's assume, hypothetically, that the United States successfully acquires Greenland through purchase, coercion, whatever mechanism. We get the territory, we get the resources, we start developing those rare earth mines and oil fields. What happens next? Economists have a name for it, Dutch disease, and it's killed more economies than most wars. In 1959, the Netherlands discovered the Groningen gas field, one of the largest natural gas deposits in the world. Windfall, national celebration, easy money. Within a decade, Dutch manufacturing was collapsing. Unemployment rose. The guilder strengthened. Export industries that had nothing to do with gas couldn't compete on global markets anymore. Here's the mechanism, as formalized by economists Corden and Neary. The spending effect. Resource wealth floods the economy. Demand for non-tradable goods, services, construction, real estate explodes. Prices rise. Wages inflate. The entire cost structure of the economy shifts upward. The resource movement effect. Capital and labor migrate toward the booming resource sector. Why invest in manufacturing when extraction offers better returns? Why work in a factory when the mines pay twice as much? The currency effect. All those resource exports bring foreign currency flooding in. Demand for your currency rises. Your exchange rate appreciates. And suddenly, everything you export that isn't a raw material becomes prohibitively expensive on world markets. Now apply this to the United States, an economy that's already vulnerable. American manufacturing has been hollowing out for decades. The smile curve philosophy told corporate America that value lies in design and marketing, the ends of the production chain, while actual manufacturing is dirty work, best outsourced to China. We stopped making things. We designed things and sold things. The middle got shipped overseas. This pre-existing condition makes Dutch disease potentially lethal. If the U.S. begins extracting trillions of dollars worth of resources from Greenland, rare earths, oil, gas, here's what happens to the dollar. Foreign direct investment pours in. Developing those deposits requires hundreds of billions in capital. That money flows into dollars. The DXY index, the measure of dollar strength against major currencies, could appreciate 10 to 15% from the Greenland factor alone. Every 1% the dollar strengthens reduces American exporters' profits in foreign markets by roughly the same amount. Boeing, John Deere, Ford, Intel all suddenly face a currency headwind they can't overcome through efficiency gains. Here's the political dimension that matters. The factories that close won't be in Washington or New York. They'll be in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, the industrial heartland, the same states that decide presidential elections. We're potentially trading strategic resource security for economic devastation in swing states, solving a 20th century security problem by creating a 21st century economic catastrophe. The obvious counterargument is Norway. Norway discovered North Sea oil in the 1960s. Same windfall, different outcome. Today, Norway has the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, over $1.5 trillion and maintained a diversified economy. Why can't America follow the Norway model? 3 reasons. First, wage coordination. Norway used centralized wage bargaining to prevent oil sector wages from inflating the entire economy. Workers in Bergen couldn't demand gas sector salaries for non-gas work because national agreements controlled wage growth. The U.S. labor market is radically decentralized. High wages in Arctic extraction would immediately ripple through the service economy, inflating costs everywhere. Second, fiscal discipline. Norway invested its surplus abroad. The fund is explicitly prohibited from investing domestically because doing so would cause inflation. The United States runs chronic deficits. We don't save windfalls, we spend them, often before they arrive. The political pressure to use Greenland revenues for immediate consumption would be overwhelming. Third, institutional capacity. Greenland's entire workforce is approximately 36,000 people. A single mine project requires 5,000 workers during construction. We'd have to import a labor force larger than the native population, creating social pressures and administrative burdens that make resource extraction look more like colonial administration. Norway succeeded because it had institutions designed to prevent Dutch disease before the oil arrived. The United States doesn't have those institutions. We're not going to build them, and that means the disease would spread. Let me shift from economics to something equally quantifiable: alliance mathematics. Think of NATO not as a military organization, but as a system of trust transactions. Each member pays into the system: defense spending, troop commitments, intelligence sharing, and receives security guarantees in return. The value of those guarantees depends entirely on credibility. Game theorists call this the shadow of the future. I cooperate with you today because I expect our relationship to continue tomorrow. If I think you might betray me next year, my incentive to cooperate now collapses. What the tariff ultimatum did was change the shadow of the future for every NATO ally. Denmark is a small country. Population, 5 million. Defense budget, roughly $10 billion. It cannot resist American economic pressure indefinitely. But here's the game theory. Every other NATO ally watched what happened. They observed the United States treating a founding alliance member as a vassal state, demanding territorial tribute in exchange for trade access. The rational response? Hedge, diversify, reduce dependency. If America will coerce Denmark over Greenland, what stops them from coercing Germany over trade policy, France over nuclear cooperation, Poland over border policy? The answer is nothing, and European capitals know it. The European response has been swift and unified. The anti-coercion instrument, a mechanism the EU designed specifically to counter Chinese economic pressure, is now being discussed as a tool against the United States. The irony is not lost on anyone in Brussels. The Turnberry trade deal, a comprehensive US-EU agreement signed just months earlier, is effectively dead. The European Parliament's major voting blocs declared approval impossible following the tariff announcement. France is accelerating its strategic autonomy doctrine, the idea that Europe must develop independent military capabilities rather than relying on American guarantees. Germany is reconsidering decades of defense restraint. The Nordic Council issued a joint declaration rejecting U.S. overtures, presenting a unified front that didn't exist 3 months ago. Here's what this means in practical terms. European defense spending will increase, not coordinated with Washington, but independent of it. French defense contractors will fill orders that would have gone to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. European intelligence services will share less with American counterparts. Military planning will increasingly assume U.S. unreliability as a baseline. We're not losing an alliance in a dramatic collapse. We're watching it hollow out from within, trust transaction by trust transaction, decision by decision, until the structure that won the Cold War becomes a shell. While Washington obsesses over Arctic ice, Beijing is executing a different strategy entirely. The defining metric of 2026 isn't military power or economic size, it's something simpler: consistency. For decades, the United States accumulated what I call trust capital, the accumulated credibility of being a reliable partner. That capital allowed us to build coalitions, set global rules, and project power far beyond our military reach. We are liquidating that capital at an astonishing rate. China's pitch to the global South isn't ideological. It isn't join communism. It's pragmatic. We don't change our deals every election cycle. We don't threaten tariffs when you disagree with us. We build ports and railways. We show up. Indonesia. Washington demanded a 32% tariff reduction, required purchases of American military drones, restrictions on Chinese software, and a readjustment of South China Sea policy. In exchange for what? Continued market access that Indonesia could get elsewhere. The Indonesian response, paraphrased from diplomatic back channels, America brings nothing to the table nowadays. All they do is demand total subjugation. Indonesia sped up integration with China. Beijing remains their largest trading partner, $58 billion in 2025. Jakarta isn't pivoting to China out of ideological affinity. They're doing it to escape American volatility. Brazil. 10 years ago, it took roughly a year for Brazil to export $1 billion worth of goods to China. By 2026, that volume moves every 72 hours. That's not a trade relationship, that's economic gravity. Brazilian leadership has explicitly rejected Western calls to decouple from China. They call the American containment obsession deeply unrealistic. While Washington negotiates over Arctic territory it doesn't need, China is building the trade infrastructure of the 21st century across 3 continents. Even Saudi Arabia, historically one of America's closest partners, is hedging. The kingdom has begun settling energy transactions in renminbi. It's issuing panda bonds to access Chinese capital markets. Its new investment laws explicitly prioritize Asian capital flows. Why? Because the Saudis can do basic math. A partner who threatens tariffs over political disagreements is a partner who might weaponize the dollar against you next. Better to diversify. The ultimate irony of the Greenland trap is this. By obsessing over potential rare earth deposits, we're losing the actual battle for global influence. While we allocate diplomatic bandwidth to annexing territory, China is locking up supply chains across Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. We're fighting for the map. They're redrawing the trade routes. I'm not here to tell you buying Greenland is right or wrong. That's not analysis. That's opinion. What I can show you is the balance sheet. Strategic benefits. Potential resource independence from Chinese rare earth processing. Control of the GIUK gap for anti-submarine warfare. Enhanced missile defense positioning, though we already have operational access. Symbolic completion of North American consolidation. Economic costs, dollar appreciation potentially 10 to 15%, devastating for manufacturing exports. Capital displacement from industrial reshoring to Arctic extraction. Labor market distortions as extraction wages ripple through the economy. Fiscal absorption of Greenland's $600 million annual welfare costs, likely ballooning under U.S. administration. Diplomatic costs. Activation of EU anti-coercion instrument against the United States. Collapse of comprehensive trade agreements. Erosion of NATO trust architecture. Crimea 2.0 moral equivalence, undermining coalition building against actual adversaries. Acceleration of Global South pivot toward China as consistent partner. Here's the conclusion I've reached after examining the data. Buying Greenland solves a 20th century security problem. Resource independence, territorial buffer, missile defense, these are Cold War concerns wearing 21st century clothing. But in solving that problem, we create 21st century catastrophes. Industrial decline through currency appreciation, alliance fragmentation through coercive diplomacy, and global realignment through demonstrated unreliability. The Greenland trap isn't that the island is worthless. It's that the method of acquisition triggers cascading failures across every other dimension of American power. We would gain the high ground of the Arctic while surrendering the high ground of economic competitiveness, alliance leadership, and moral authority. The Greeks didn't conquer Troy by offering a gift. They conquered it because the Trojans wanted the gift so badly they stopped calculating the cost. 38 million tons of rare earth oxides, 7 billion barrels of oil, the front porch of North American defense. It looks like a prize. The math says it's a trap. What I've learned analyzing geopolitical systems for a decade is that the most dangerous moves in international relations aren't the obvious aggressions. They're the gifts that seem too good to refuse. Greenland is that gift. The question isn't whether America can take it. The question is whether America can afford what it costs, not in dollars, but in everything else that makes a superpower actually super. Subscribe if you want to understand the calculations behind the headlines. I'll keep showing you the math.